Hello, I'm Sarah Bennett. I'm 28 years old, and for the last 4 years I've been the senior software engineer quietly building the core product behind my family's tech company in Austin, Texas. 3 days ago, I was driving down I-35 on my way to the office, rehearsing one more time for the biggest investor pitch of my career, when a pickup lost control in the rain and slammed hard enough into my car to turn the inside of it into twisted metal and blood. By the time the paramedics got me to the ER, I could barely breathe. My chest felt like it was collapsing, and my phone kept slipping out of my hand because one of my arms would not stop shaking. I remember staring at the hospital ceiling, trying not to pass out, and calling the one person I still thought would come if it was really serious. I told my dad I had been in a terrible car accident and asked him to pick me up from the ER. He texted back, "I'm at lunch with your stepmom. Can't just leave." I stared at those words so long they stopped looking real. I just wrote back, "Okay." That was it. No yelling, no begging, no dramatic speech. Just one word, because something inside me went completely cold in that moment. But what he did not know was that while he stayed at that lunch table, the police were about to call him with details he had not bothered to ask for, and the company he cared more about than his own daughter was sitting on a $12 million deal that could not move 1 inch without me. For 3 straight days after that, my phone would not stop ringing. And by the time he finally understood what his 11 words had cost him, it was already too late. Before I tell you what happened when the police reached him and why my phone started exploding nonstop for 3 days, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, because I have a feeling this story is going to travel a lot farther than that lunch ever did. The nurse took my phone from my hand after I dropped it for the second time and asked if there was anybody else she could call, but I kept shaking my head because pain has a strange way of stripping your life down to the ugliest truth. The truth was that I did have coworkers, neighbors, people from college, even a few women I grabbed coffee with sometimes. But in that moment, I still wanted my father. I still wanted to believe that once he understood how bad it was, he would rush through those hospital doors and act like a dad instead of a CEO, with perfect timing and selective priorities. A police officer standing near my bed tried his number again, while the trauma team adjusted my oxygen and checked the bruising across my ribs. This time, he got through. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Serious accident, chest trauma, possible internal injury. "Yes, sir, this is not minor." Then a pause, another pause, and finally the officer's face changed in a way that made my stomach turn colder than the IV fluid running into my arm. When he hung up, I asked the question before I could stop myself. "Is he coming?" The officer hesitated just long enough to answer me without really answering. He said he sounded concerned. Concerned, not terrified, not on his way. Not "Tell her I'm coming right now." Just concerned. About 20 minutes later, my phone started lighting up with messages. "Sarah, I did not realize it was this serious. Sarah, answer me. Sarah, I am trying to leave. Sarah, your stepmother is not feeling well. Sarah, do not make this worse than it already is. That last one did something to me. I was lying there with cracked ribs and blood dried along my hairline, and somehow I was still being told not to make things worse. Not the rain. Not the driver who hit me. Not the man who chose lunch over his daughter in the ER me. I turned my face toward the wall and let the tears come for exactly 10 seconds, because once they started, they were not about the accident anymore. They were about every dinner he canceled because she had a headache, every milestone he showed up late to, every meeting where I did the work, and he smiled for the credit. Every time I let myself think next time would be different. The next person who came through the door was Robert Klein. He looked like he had run up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, tie crooked, jacket half-buttoned, face pale in that very American, very male way older executives get when they are scared but trying to stay useful. He had been our CFO longer than I had been legally allowed to drive, and he was the closest thing I had to a real mentor inside that company. He did not waste time pretending everything would be fine. He looked at the monitor, looked at the brace around my arm, looked at my face, and said quietly, "He should have been here before me." I laughed once, which hurt so badly I regretted it instantly. Robert pulled the visitor chair closer and lowered his voice. Sarah, there's something you need to know before tonight gets any uglier. I thought he meant the investor dinner. I thought he meant the board was panicking. I thought the worst thing waiting for me was that the live demo might crash without me there. I was wrong. He told me he had seen emails over the last few weeks that made him uneasy, and now he was done staying silent. He said Lisa had been speaking to a recruiter in Dallas and another one in Denver, asking for candidates who could be positioned as a new technical lead after the pitch. Not before. After. After the contract was secured. After my system was locked in. After my work finished making everyone else look brilliant. She wanted someone polished, client-friendly, easier to manage. I looked at him for a long second, too exhausted to react the way I probably should have. So that was the plan. Use me one last time and phase me out. Robert nodded slowly. I think your father let himself believe it was a reorganization. I think she sold it as image management. I think he has been lying to himself for a while. That was when my phone buzzed again with a video call from him, then another, all ignored. Robert glanced down at the screen and then back at me. He needs something now. I swallowed hard and forced myself to say the words out loud. The demo server. Only I can unlock the live environment and run the final sequence. Robert did not blink. Then for once, Sarah, maybe the company can wait. I looked at the ceiling again, at the fluorescent lights, at the thin crack in one tile, and I felt something settle in me. Not rage, not revenge. Something colder. Something cleaner. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking what would save my family and started asking what might save me. And what Robert said next made that question impossible to ignore. He leaned closer and said, if you open that server after what he did today, they will take the deal, take your work, and take your place. If you do nothing, they may finally have to face what you've been carrying for years. I did nothing that first day except breathe, answer the doctors when they needed me to, and watch my phone turn into a confession booth for people who had never planned to confess. My father texted like a man trying to outrun his own guilt. First he was apologetic, then confused, then defensive, then businesslike, which somehow felt worse than all the others. Sarah, the client needs the final walkthrough credentials by tomorrow morning. Sarah, Robert says you are conscious. Sarah, answer me please. Sarah, I am under a lot of pressure here. Sarah, this is bigger than personal feelings. By the second day, Lisa had joined in. She texted as if we were two professionals dealing with an unfortunate inconvenience, instead of a woman who had spent 3 years manufacturing emergencies every time my life required my father's full attention. She wrote that the company could not be held hostage over a misunderstanding. She wrote that investors did not care about private family emotions. She wrote that if I truly cared about my long-term future, I would think carefully about how I handled the next 24 hours. I read every message once and then handed the phone to Robert. He stood by my bed and read them again, slower, jaw tighter with each screen. Good, I told him. I want somebody else to see exactly how they sound when they think I still belong to them. That afternoon, he came back with a legal pad, a laptop, and the expression of a man who had finally decided which side of history he wanted to be on. We started building a timeline. Not for court, at least not yet. For reality, the kind that cannot be waved away in a conference room by louder people with better suits. He pulled up archived emails showing I had designed the product architecture from the earliest stage. He showed me internal threads where clients specifically requested me for technical reviews. He showed me calendar invitations where I had written the demo strategy, risk plan, rollback logic, and server protections that were now the only reason Bennett Tech had any shot at landing the $12 million contract. He even found messages from my father thanking me privately for saving deadlines he later presented publicly as executive leadership wins. If I had not been so tired, I might have smiled. The truth looked almost beautiful when it was finally arranged in order. There it was. 4 years of invisible labor in clean black text. There I was. Not difficult. Not emotional. Not lucky to be included. Essential. The more Robert uncovered, the more obvious it became that the investor dinner was supposed to be the final act in a story where I never got named as the lead character. They would present the demo. They would celebrate the contract. They would let my father bask in the glow of another big win. Then, somewhere over the next month, they would gradually shift my responsibilities, spin it as restructuring, and move in somebody more polished for the next chapter. It was so predictable it almost made me laugh. The family company had always had room for my talent, just never for my spotlight. That night, my father started leaving voicemails instead of texts. The first one sounded shaken. The second sounded angry. By the fifth, he sounded desperate in a way I had never heard before. "Sarah, this is getting out of hand. Sarah, you cannot punish an entire company because you are upset with me. Sarah, pick up the phone. I am your father." That line stayed with me because he said it like a title, like a legal claim, like a card he could still put on the table whenever he needed to win the hand. I listened to the messages with my eyes closed while the machines around me beeped softly in the dark. Then I told Robert to save them all. Every text. Every voicemail. Every timestamp. Around noon on the third day, a message came in that changed the temperature in the room. It was not from my father. It was from a board member who had always treated me kindly but carefully, the way wealthy Americans treat the person who keeps the lights on while they discuss vision. She wrote that there was growing concern about the live demo, that several board members had been told I was unavailable because of stress, and that if there was anything she should know before that evening, she hoped I would trust her. Stress. That was the story they were already selling. Not car accident. Not ER. Not cracked ribs. Stress. I sat up a little too fast and sucked in air through my teeth. Robert was at my side in a second. "They are already trying to rewrite this," I said. He nodded. "Then do not let them." My father called again. This time I answered, not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because I wanted to hear what he sounded like when he could no longer hide behind typed words. The second he heard me breathe, he started talking. "Sarah, thank God. I have been trying to reach you nonstop. I did not realize how severe it was. Lisa told me the ER cleared you quickly." I looked at Robert and saw the exact moment he understood the lie. I asked my father one question. "Did you ever ask how bad it was before you decided lunch mattered more?" Silence. Then he exhaled and tried to pivot. "This is not the time for that. The investors arrive in a few hours. We need to focus on what matters right now." I almost laughed again. For once, he was right. We did need to focus on what mattered. We just no longer meant the same thing. I told him calmly that I was under doctor's orders, that I would not be opening the live environment from a hospital bed, and that if Bennett Tech had built a company so fragile it could lose a $12 million contract because one injured engineer stopped carrying everyone else, that was not my failure. It was his. He started begging then, really begging. Voice cracking, saying, "Please, sweetheart, please do not do this. Please do not embarrass me tonight." Embarrass me? Not lose me? Not hurt me. Embarrass me. That was when I knew the story had already ended for him, even if he had not realized it yet. I hung up, handed the phone back to Robert, and said, "If they want a performance tonight, I think it is finally my turn." By the morning of the investor dinner, my pain had dulled just enough to let anger stand up straight. The doctors wanted to keep me another night, but I had lived too long inside that company not to recognize the difference between a crisis and an ending. I was not going there to scream or collapse or destroy something. I was going because for 4 years I had watched other people tell my story badly, and I was done giving them the microphone. Right before noon, while Robert was downstairs dealing with discharge paperwork and my nurse was changing out an IV bag, she came in. Lisa. She did not knock. She never knocked anywhere in my life, because boundaries were for people she considered equal. She swept into that hospital room wearing cream slacks, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and the expression of a woman who still believed presentation could overpower facts. She stopped for half a second when she saw the bruising on my face, the tape on my arm, the way I had to brace myself just to shift in bed. Then the sympathy vanished as quickly as it came. "There you are," she said, as if I had inconvenienced her by surviving. "We need to make this quick. I need your work phone, your laptop, and the authentication device tied to the demo environment. I stared at her because sometimes the ugliest people do you the favor of speaking plainly. She kept going, talking in that clipped consultant voice she used whenever she wanted to sound objective instead of cruel. The client is already nervous. Your father is under a tremendous amount of pressure. If you approve the access handoff and give us the admin sequence, we can still salvage tonight. I asked one question. Did he finally leave lunch? Her mouth tightened. This is not about lunch. No, I said quietly. It is exactly about lunch. For the first time all week, she lost that polished mask. She stepped closer to the bed and lowered her voice. Do not be dramatic, Sarah. Men like your father have responsibilities bigger than your feelings, bigger than my collapsed lung, too. She ignored that. She said the board was already asking questions, that I needed to think long-term, that people in leadership notice who stays loyal under pressure. I almost admired how cleanly she used the word loyal in place of obedient. When I did not answer, she tried another angle. If you want to keep your future at Bennett Tech, you need to stop acting like this is personal. That was when I finally sat up straighter and looked right at her. You mean, stop acting like my father left me in the ER and start acting like your dinner reservation mattered more. Her face hardened. Your father built that company. I smiled through the pain because there it was again, the lie they had all agreed to repeat until it sounded normal. No, I said. My grandfather started it. I built the platform keeping it alive. And my father built a habit of taking credit from the nearest woman who still loved him. She slapped the side rail of the bed hard enough to make my monitor jump. Do not talk to me like that. Before I could answer, my nurse stepped in and asked her to leave. Lisa did not move. Instead, she turned and announced, loud enough for the hallway to hear, that I was emotionally unstable and jeopardizing a major contract out of spite. It would have worked, too, if she had not chosen a hospital full of professionals who had spent 2 days keeping me alive. Security appeared within minutes. She tried one last time on her way out, telling me I was making the worst mistake of my life. I told her no, the worst mistake of my life was mistaking manipulation for family. When Robert came back upstairs, he found me shaking with equal parts pain and adrenaline. I told him everything, every word, and he did not look surprised. He said security downstairs had already sent over footage from the corridor because Lisa tried to tell the desk staff she was there to retrieve company property from an incapacitated employee. Company property. That was all I had ever been to her. A useful asset attached to a last name she wanted control over. A few hours later, my father finally showed up. He carried flowers too bright for the room, a gift shop teddy bear, and the face of a man who had spent the day realizing apologies become expensive when they arrive late. He sat carefully in the chair Robert had just vacated and opened with, "I am sorry," the way executives open with, "I appreciate your feedback," before refusing to change anything. He said there had been miscommunication. He said he trusted the wrong version of events. He said nobody told him how critical my condition was until later. I listened without interrupting because lies get more useful the longer you let them run. Then he made the mistake that ended whatever was left between us. He said, "Sarah, if you can find it in your heart to help me get through tonight, we can fix all of this after the pitch. Help me. Not help yourself. Not help the truth. Help me." I asked him if he knew what my oxygen level was when the ambulance brought me in. He blinked. I asked if he knew how many ribs were fractured. He did not answer. I asked if he even knew which hospital had treated me before his third apology. He looked down at the teddy bear in his hands, and I saw it hit him all at once that he was not just late. He was irrelevant. Robert re-entered the room then, perfectly timed, carrying discharge documents and a garment bag. My father looked up, confused. "Garment bag?" Robert met his eyes and said evenly, "Sarah will not be unlocking your server tonight, but she will be attending your dinner." I watched my father go pale in slow motion, and for the first time since the accident, I felt stronger than he did. Austin looked unreal from the passenger seat that evening, all glass towers and wet streets reflecting gold from hotel lights, like the whole city had dressed up for a lie. Robert drove one-handed and kept the other close enough to steady me if the car hit a bump too hard. Every breath still felt sharp. Every turn reminded me my body had not agreed to this plan, but my mind had never been clearer. I wore a simple dark dress that hid most of the bruising across my torso but could not hide the hospital band around my wrist or the fading mark near my temple. "Good," Robert said when I started to tug my sleeve lower. "Let them see what they chose not to look at." On the ride over, he gave me the final state of the room, like he was briefing me for battle. The client team had arrived tense because the live walkthrough still was not running. The board had been told I was recovering from exhaustion and would not attend. My father had already made 2 comments about how technical teams can be unpredictable under stress. Lisa had been smiling too much, which, in her case, was the corporate equivalent of smoke before fire. Local startup press was there, along with a couple of Austin business reporters, because the contract had been teased as a major expansion move. Everything about the night had been designed to make Michael Bennett look visionary and stable. Nothing survives the truth for long. I checked my phone one last time before we pulled up to the JW Marriott. 43 missed calls from my father, 12 from Lisa, 5 from numbers I did not recognize, probably assistants or board members or people suddenly discovering that the engineer they kept off stage had become the center of gravity. There was also 1 short text from my father that somehow sounded smaller than all the others. "Please do not humiliate me in front of everyone." I stared at it for a long moment, then locked the screen. Robert glanced over. "Bad. Worse than bad," I said. "Honest." We entered through a side access point because Robert had arranged it that way. Even walking from the elevator to the ballroom nearly took everything out of me, but pain has a way of clarifying purpose. I was not there to put on a show. I was there so nobody else could perform me into silence again. Just outside the ballroom doors we stopped. Through the gap I could hear clinking glass, polite laughter, the low hum of wealthy people expecting to witness certainty. Robert handed me a folder, though by then most of what mattered was already backed up in 3 different places. Inside were printouts of emails, screenshots of architecture approvals, a list of my commits and deployment notes, client correspondence requesting me by name, and copies of the texts from the ER. In a separate envelope was my resignation letter, signed, dated, and ready. I asked him one last question. If I walk in there, does the board already know enough to act? He nodded once. Enough to act. Not enough to hide from it. Then another voice joined us from the hallway. A uniformed Austin police officer I had met briefly at the hospital stepped closer and introduced himself again, calm and professional. He said he was there to follow up on the emergency contact timeline and confirm statements because there had been discrepancies between hospital records and what had been relayed later. He did not promise drama. He did not need to. Sometimes truth does its best work in a flat voice. Inside the ballroom, my father was at the front near the projector screen, talking with the client's senior vice president like he still believed confidence could carry him across any missing bridge. Lisa stood nearby in a sleek black dress, hand on his arm, scanning the room the way people do when they think image is still a shield. One of the reporters lifted a phone, probably capturing table shots and speeches for social clips. Somewhere near the back, board members were already gathered in a cluster too tight to be casual. The client team did not look impressed. They looked impatient. Good. Let them feel one night of uncertainty. Let everyone in that room experience 10% of what it felt like to watch a text arrive from your own father while you lay in the ER trying not to black out. I adjusted my posture, ignored the fire in my ribs, and asked Robert if the live environment had remained untouched. He said yes. No sabotage, no interference, just an absent key. Perfect. Because that was the truth that would save me. I had not harmed the company. I had simply stopped carrying it alone. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as someone tapped a microphone and announced the evening was about to begin. I could hear applause starting, all that polished American enthusiasm people bring to money and promises. Robert looked at me and asked if I was ready. I thought about the accident, about lunch, about the years before either one, about every time I chose peace, and they called it weakness. Then I said the only honest thing left. I should have done this a long time ago. And together we stepped toward the doors just as the first crack started running through the night, because on the other side of that room, the client was asking to see the demo, the board was asking where the engineer was, and the lie my father built his whole evening around was already beginning to collapse. The first thing I saw when the ballroom doors opened was my father smiling into a microphone like the world still belonged to him. He was thanking everyone for believing in Bennett Tech Solutions, talking about resilience, innovation, family values, all the polished American corporate language that sounds noble until you know who had to bleed for it. The second thing I saw was the large screen behind him displaying a holding slide for the live demo that still had not started, because the one person who could authorize it had spent the last 3 days in a hospital bed. He looked confident from a distance. Up close, even from the doorway, I could see the strain around his eyes. The client delegation sat near the front, no longer amused by delays. Lisa stood by the stage with a fixed smile and a champagne glass she had not touched in 10 minutes. A board member noticed me first, then another. Then the room began to shift, before a word was spoken. That silent ripple wealthy people make when something more interesting than the script appears. My father followed their line of sight and stopped in the middle of a sentence. He saw the bruising on my face. He saw the hospital band. He saw the way Robert hovered half a step behind me in case I fell. Most of all, he saw that I had not come there to save him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the client executives stood and said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "Sarah, are you all right?" That was all it took. Heads turned. Phones lifted. My father stepped away from the microphone and started toward me, but he was intercepted before he got 3 steps. The Austin police officer moved calmly into his path and asked, "Mr. Bennett, can you confirm that on Tuesday afternoon you received emergency contact calls from St. David's Medical Center and APD regarding your daughter's condition after a serious collision on I-35? The officer did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The question hit harder because it sounded official and ordinary. My father froze. Lisa tried to smile and step in, but the officer continued with the kind of calm that terrifies guilty people. "We also need to verify whether this text message was sent from your phone in response to your daughter's request for help from the ER. He held up a printout. Even from where I stood, I knew exactly what it said. "I'm at lunch with your stepmom, can't just leave." The nearest tables went silent. Then the next few. Then the whole ballroom. The only sound was the hum of the projector and the tiny click of somebody across the room starting a recording. My father looked around like there might still be some version of the night he could control. There was not. He began with, "There has been a misunderstanding," which would have been funny if it had not been so predictable. The client's senior vice president did not let him finish. He looked from my face to the officer to the stalled demo screen and said, "Is this the engineer we were told was unavailable because of stress?" Nobody answered because nobody could answer that without admitting what they had done. Lisa recovered first, or tried to. She said my condition had been exaggerated and that private family matters were being weaponized in a business setting. That was when I walked forward, slower than I wanted because of the pain, but steady enough to make each step count. I said into the silence, "The only thing being weaponized tonight is the truth you thought you could keep off stage." Every camera in the room turned toward me. I took the microphone from its stand before my father could reach it and introduced myself the way I should have been introduced 100 times before. "My name is Sarah Bennett. I am the senior software engineer who built the core product and live demo system behind the platform you were all invited here to celebrate tonight. Not support engineer. Not technical staff. Built it." Behind me, on the big screen, the holding slide vanished because Robert had already plugged in the laptop with my file deck. The first image that appeared was not code. It was an email from my father to the client 6 weeks earlier, thanking me by name for leading the product architecture and final demo environment. The next was a thread showing him privately asking me to fix problems he later presented publicly as executive wins. The next showed deployment logs, approvals, and client notes requesting my presence for technical sign-off. Each slide landed like a hammer because none of it was dramatic. It was clean, dated, verifiable. American professionals fear documentation more than shouting. My father tried to interrupt twice. The first time I kept speaking over him. The second time one of the board members told him to sit down. I cannot describe the look on his face without saying it was the first honest expression I had ever seen from him in public. He looked small. Then I told the room what happened in the ER. I did not embellish. I did not cry. I did not need to. I told them I called my father after a terrible car accident and asked him to pick me up. I told them he texted back that he was at lunch and could not just leave. I told them I replied, "Okay," because I finally understood my place in his priorities. Then I told them something even more important. I have not sabotaged this company. I have not touched the live environment since my accident. The demo is not failing because I broke it. It is failing because for years this company allowed one person to build what everyone else depended on while stripping away her title, her credit, and eventually, her place. The client executive stood. His face had gone from irritated to disgusted. He said, "So the person who actually built the system is the one your CEO left in the ER while telling us everything was under control." Nobody answered him either. He nodded once, sharp and final. "Then our company cannot proceed with this partnership." $12 million died in that sentence, and the room felt it. You could almost hear the math hitting people's chests. My father took one step toward me and whispered my name like it might still work as a shield. "Sarah, please, you are humiliating us." I looked right at him and said the line I had not known I was saving until that moment. "You did not lose this company tonight. You lost me in the ER." I handed the microphone back into the stand, took my resignation letter from the folder, and gave copies to the board chair and general counsel. Then I said one last thing into the room before anyone could pull the night back into a cleaner shape. Effective immediately, I resigned from Bennett Tech Solutions. I have accepted an executive engineering role with a company that does not confuse family control with leadership and does not ask women to disappear behind men who need their work more than they respect it. That was when Lisa truly lost control. She came toward me so fast security moved before I could. She was not elegant anymore. She was furious in the ugliest way, shouting that I was selfish, unstable, vindictive, that I was destroying my own father, that none of this would have happened if I had just done my job and stopped making everything personal. The room watched her unravel in real time, and something almost generous happened in that moment. She finally told the truth about herself without meaning to. Every fake emergency, every manipulative interruption, every polished excuse. Suddenly, they all made sense to people who had only seen the surface. The board chair, Elaine Porter, did not wait for the room to settle. She walked to the front, asked security to remove Lisa from the immediate area, and announced that due to the failed investor event, the misrepresentation of material operational facts, and the alarming revelations concerning executive conduct, Michael Bennett was being placed on immediate administrative leave pending emergency board action. The sentence barely finished before my father turned to me with tears in his eyes. Real tears, I think. Too late ones, definitely. He said, "Please do not do this," like I still held the knife, when all I had done was stop bandaging his wounds for him. He reached for me, and for the first time in my life, I took a step back, without guilt. Reporters were shouting questions by then. Board members were huddling near the stage. The client team was already leaving. The cameras loved the mess, but I barely noticed them. What I noticed was that even now, at the very bottom of the night, my father had still not asked the only question that mattered. "Are you okay?" Robert moved beside me just as my knees began to weaken, and together we turned away from the stage while my father's empire started collapsing behind us in the bright hotel light. By 9 the next morning, Michael Bennett was no longer CEO. The board did not drag it out because public companies can afford scandal a little better than family companies can afford humiliation with proof attached. Bennett Tech Solutions had spent years selling stability, leadership, and trust to enterprise clients, and in one night, the market saw the truth. The founder's son, who loved talking about values, had left his own daughter in the ER and then lied about the condition of the engineer holding together the biggest contract of the year. The board called it a leadership failure. Austin called it exactly what it looked like. By lunchtime, screenshots of the text message were everywhere. Not full national scandal everywhere, but everywhere that mattered to our world. Group chats, founder circles, local business pages, startup forums, LinkedIn posts written in that fake professional tone people use when they are dying to say something cruel in polite language. A short clip of the officer confirming the emergency contact text began circulating that afternoon, followed by another video of me, standing bruised under ballroom lights, while the demo screen stayed blank behind me. A few days later, more footage surfaced from the hotel corridor and the hospital complaint record, and the story caught a second wave that finished what the first one started. Michael tried a brief statement through counsel about a painful family misunderstanding during a medical crisis. It only made him sound more dishonest because the timeline was too clean and the text was too short. 11 words had more power than any PR team in Austin. Lisa filed for divorce before the month was over, but she did not leave with the elegant exit she probably pictured. Her reputation in local business circles was dead. Nobody wanted a former consultant turned executive spouse whose name was now attached to manipulation, public meltdown, and the kind of cold opportunism that makes even ambitious people uncomfortable. The last I heard, she was doing part-time operations work for a small firm outside Austin under a different version of her resume, which felt fitting. She had spent years helping rewrite everyone else's reality. Now even her own had to be edited to survive. As for my father, he spent the first several weeks doing what men like him always do when consequences finally get personal. He blamed stress, then Lisa, then the board, then the media. Then, when none of that worked, he started trying on the language of accountability like a suit he had not broken in yet. Robert kept me updated because he knew I did not want direct contact. Michael sold stock to cover the financial mess that followed the failed deal, the leadership separation terms, and a separate compensation agreement over credit theft and retained intellectual contributions that his attorneys suddenly wanted to settle very quietly. The same man who once could not leave lunch now had all the time in the world to sit with what it cost him. 3 months later, I started my new role as Vice President of Product Engineering at a larger firm with a real equity package, real authority, and an executive team that introduced me by name without hesitation. The first time our CEO said, "Sarah built this platform strategy," and then stopped talking so I could take over, I nearly forgot what room I was in. Respect can feel strangely emotional when you have been starved of it for years. My new office was not bigger than the one I had before, but it was mine in a way that mattered more. Nothing in it had been borrowed from somebody else's ego. My work was credited properly. My team knew who to ask because I was actually allowed to lead them. And for the first time in my career, I did not feel like I was begging my own life to make space for me. A few months after that, with Robert's help, I set up a small fund and mentorship initiative for employees trapped in family-controlled workplaces where their labor is used, but their names are erased. We focused on documentation, boundaries, credit protection, and exit strategies. It was not huge. It did not need to be. Meaningful things rarely start huge. They start when one person decides that what happened to them should not keep happening to others in silence. My father eventually wrote a letter. Then another. Then one that finally sounded less like strategy and more like shame. I did not forgive him in some dramatic movie scene because life is not healed by a single conversation, and blood does not erase damage. Months later, I agreed to one coffee in a public place with clear boundaries. No business, no self-pity, no asking me to rebuild what he broke. He looked older, smaller, more careful. Maybe some of it was real growth. Maybe some of it was just loss. I listened to his apology and told him something I wish more people understood sooner. Family is not proved by DNA, titles, or old photographs. It is proved by who gets up from the table when you call for help. He cried, "I did not. I was not cruel. I was just done translating basic decency into something extraordinary because it came too late." The biggest lesson in all of this was never really about revenge, even if the night at the hotel gave people that satisfying kind of justice they always want from stories like mine. The real lesson was about worth. About what happens when you spend years shrinking yourself to keep peace with people who only love you comfortably, never sacrificially. About how dangerous it is to confuse loyalty with self-abandonment. About why young professionals, especially daughters in family businesses, need to document their work, protect their names, and stop assuming love will make unfair systems fair. There is educational value in that truth, because too many people are raised to believe that enduring mistreatment quietly is maturity, when sometimes the most responsible thing you can do for your future is refuse to be used one more day. If my story means anything, I hope it reminds people that boundaries are not cruelty, evidence is not disloyalty, and choosing yourself is not selfish when the people closest to you keep asking you to disappear for their comfort. Blood may make you related, but real family is the person who leaves the table when you need them. And if you have ever had to learn that lesson the hard way, then you know the quietest decisions are sometimes the ones that change your life forever.